And let me also share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see this. Slideshow. And can everybody see this okay?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Angie. Folks, I'm Mike Jones. I'm the Public Lands Campaign Coordinator for West Virginia Rivers. We appreciate you joining us today in this conversation on Headwaters. As we're beginning our introductions, we invite you to share in the chat your name, where you're from, and just what the term Headwaters means to you. For those of you that are not as familiar perhaps with Zoom, if you move your cursor to the bottom of your window, you should see a little block and the word chat, and you can click on that, and that will give you the chat that you can type in any comments. We'll be watching that. Any questions, we'll be watching that as we go along. And hopefully when we turn to the conversation portion of this presentation, we'll share what's in the chat, and perhaps people will be willing to talk and engage in a conversation. This is today about the Mon Forest Headwaters. This has been of some interest to West Virginia Rivers for some period of time. If you note in the first picture that we start with this slide, some people hiking over a bridge, over some headwater type waters. And that's what we're considering at West Virginia Rivers, the idea of how do we take what's going on now with Mon Forest Headwaters and walk across perhaps a different policy bridge in an attempt to make the care and the concern and the safeguards for the Mon Forest Headwaters a little more permanent. So we'll start off with just kind of a simple question. What are headwaters? We'll start with a definition from the EPA on their headwater stream studies, and they kind of define it, headwaters as being the part of the river that is at the end of the river, or where two rivers merge together. But we really know what the headwaters are. That's the small snow melt, the beginning of the rivets that turn into runs, that turn into creeks, that turn into streams, that become our rivers. When we talk about headwaters for the Mon Forest, many of our iconic and important rivers in West Virginia begin in the Mon Forest. The Potomac, the Greenbrier, the Elk, Tiger, Steep, the Gauley, all have their origins in the Mon Forest. These rivers combine with other rivers and waterways and eventually drain into the Chesapeake and the Ohio watershed. 9% of American people can trace the source of their drinking water ultimately back to the Mon Forest Headwaters. If you look at Pocahontas County alone, one of the 10 counties in the Mon Forest area, it alone is the source and the beginning of 8 different rivers. And one thing that perhaps if we could ask that you mute yourself until we take the time to have a more open conversation. I appreciate that very much. In 2021, West Virginia Rivers commissioned a series of listening studies among recreation users of the Mon Forest. We had a session with hikers, a session with boaters, a session with campers, a session with hunters, with anglers, with accessibility concerns, and in total had a total of 13 Zoom listening sessions asking people questions about how do you interact with the Mon, the very kind of practical logistical questions. How do you get to the mine? When you get there, what do you do? What challenges and barriers come up that are of concern to you? And the recreation users identified 9 areas of concern, including promoting non-motorized recreation, trail maintenance, upkeep, and building the trails that need to be built, making sure that those unique spots are not overused, funding issues, invasive species, access and mapping, U.S. Geological Survey, river gauges, and a state policy of a bridge bill, which is where the Highway Department, West Virginia Highway Department, assesses whether when they build a bridge or repair a bridge, if there's a possibility of doing public access. But what they uniformly said, almost to the person, was that underlying whatever recreation it is that that person enjoys, whether it's hunting, kayaking, or fishing, or hiking, or bird watching, it underlies in the importance is the headwaters. As our report points out, virtually all participants were saying the Mon headwaters are pure, they're pristine, they're well taken care of thanks to the efforts of the U.S. Forest Service and the Monongahela National Forest. And we're going to talk a little bit in a few minutes about what that status quo is, what the Forest Service is doing. But recreation users expressed a concern that the Forest Service, with the best of intention, is limited to the prescriptions that are in the Forest Management Plan, and forest management plans can be changed. Having done this survey, we then went out to the public. We talked to elected officials and to Convention Bureau and the mayors of the Mon Forest town. But what we were most concerned about was going to the Mon Forest towns themselves, talking to community members. And we convened a series of 4 community conversations, like the one in the picture. And we explained and presented to the folks that attended the policy concerns that recreation users had. And then we wanted people to participate in this, so we listed all of the 9 policy options, gave everybody 3 little green sticky dots, and let them vote on the policy concern. They could vote 3 votes on one policy concern. They could vote 1 little green dot on each of 3 policy concerns. And what we found out was that people had primarily a lot of support for the trails that we've talked about, the health of our unique places, but overwhelmingly, the largest number of votes of green dots was for safeguards for the headwaters. So this is what we've heard. We heard it from recreation users across the spectrum and the multifaceted of recreation in the Mon Forest. We heard it from the public that came to these community meetings, safeguard our headwaters. So now we're in the next phase of our campaign, and we've asked and invited folks from West Virginia Rivers Coalition to get the first look at some of these questions that we're asking and to share with back with us some of your responses and concerns. So now basically what we're asking is, what does this mean? What do safeguards of our headwaters mean? What policy will best be able to continue ecosystem health throughout the Mon Forest and the multifaceted recreational opportunities that we enjoy in the Mon Forest? As we begin this exploration, and this is a picture from the scenic highway looking out over the Williams River watershed and valley and looking out in the vista and all those potential possible policy options that we have, we wanted to have our inquiries and our looking at policy with some of these questions in mind. First of all, how do we assure that any policy that's enacted is permanent, that it's going to assure the protections of the Mon Forest headwaters? How do we assure that all of our various recreational uses continue and are controlled by local rules, licensing, hunting seasons, fishing seasons, that sort of stuff? How does that stay local and under local control? How do we assure that management and important things as part of management, like fishery habitat restoration, continue and are permitted and continue under local control? And lastly, how do we assure that private property rights and uses continue? So with that lens and with those questions, we begin to look at some of the policies. First thing is we want to know what's being done now. This is a drawing and a map from the 1995 report that the Forest Service did on special waterways within the Mon Forest or within the area designated as being the Mon Forest. This is our status quo, if you will. In 1995, the U.S. Forest Service designated 12 Mon Forest waterway segments as having two important aspects. They're free-flowing, and they have at least one, and in most cases, multiple outstandingly remarkable values. And with those two criterion, free-flowing and an outstanding remarkable value, the Forest Service determined that these water segments were eligible for designation as a wild and scenic river. Making that designation, the Forest Service then took on the responsibility and obligation to care for these waterways with a little more care and special attention. The map shows generally where these water segments are. They're listed here on the slide. The Shavers Fork, Dry Fork. I saw somebody in the comments had mentioned living near the Shavers Fork, Gladys Fork, Laurel Fork, Blackwater, Otter Creek, Red Creek, North Fork of the Cherry, Seneca Creek, Williams, and the South Branch of the Potomac, and a real mouthful, the North Fork of the South Branch of the Potomac. These 12 waterways since 1995 have been given that special care that our recreation users noted by the U.S. Forest Service. And just incidentally, these aren't the only rivers that government agencies have looked at. There's 44 additional West Virginia water segments above and beyond these 12, a total of 56, that are on what's called the Nationwide Rivers Inventory. This is a list of rivers in the United States that have been determined to be free-flowing and having some kind of outstandingly remarkable value. So this is our status quo. The Forest Service is managing it, and they do it as within the limits and within the confines of their forest plans and management prescriptions. So now we're looking, well, what are some other possible policy options? And of course, any policy option is going to raise questions and concerns and need information. So what are these concerns about any possible ideas that we might want to consider? And so we want to share with you some of the things that we've heard. And this is where we're going to then ask for your opinion and your feedback. So again, we're back to our bridge. We're looking at how do we protect these headwaters? How do we cross a bridge of a new policy matter? So of course, one option is simply to continue the status quo. That's the Forest Service management. And generally, they've done a pretty good job with it. They take into account the wild and scenic, the special attributes of the waterways when they consider a project or a plan. They are required to assure that anything they do does not interrupt the free flow of the waterways and does not in any way impair this remarkable, outstandingly remarkable value. The purpose is that the agency is managing it until Congress can decide whether to do something about this possibility of wild and scenic river. But the recreation users pointed out a problem. They can change their future forest plans. And in fact, at any time, the Forest Service could declare that one or more or all 12 of these waterways are what they call unsuitable, and therefore release it from this special care and management. Another policy option in broad terms is some type of presidential designation. This would be something like a monument or a similar designation that's done under the Antiquity Act. They can be controversial. They may prohibit certain local uses or certain recreation uses, depending on the monuments that are involved. A third broad area of possible policies would be a congressional designation. We tend to like the idea, well, we have lawmakers look at law and policy and make that kind of decision. It's a long process. There are still some concerns about local controls, local issues. But West Virginia has experience with a congressional designation under at least the Wild and Scenic River Act. As the Bluestone has been a wild and scenic river for quite some time. West Virginia University, the Bridge Initiative on Science and Policy, issued its report, Waters of West Virginia, last year, and they made a recommendation to do exactly that. Have a Headwaters Legacy Act modeled after the proposed legislation in Montana, which is another headwater state, which would take these 12 Forest Service river segments and give them congressional designation. So, like all conversations, it's not one-sided. We're taking a look here at the Williams River, and I'm going to invite you all now to participate, and I'm going to ask you that tough thing, which is to be the first person to make a comment or something. And I know that's not fun and enjoyable, but here are some questions that might kind of help shape your proposals and your ideas. First of all, just simply, what are your ideas? What do you think about when you think about policy
but
for the Mont Forest? And then, importantly, for West Virginia rivers, are there other questions that we should be asking? What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing right now, and I think we have multiple ways for you to participate. And I would ask respectfully, unless you're speaking, if you could mute your microphone, and that way I'm not getting the feedback, but I would appreciate that. But we do have the chat. We have just raise your hand under the reaction link at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And lastly, we have, and we sent it out with the invitation, but we have a form, which if you prefer not to speak tonight, which is fine, that you can fill out either now as part of this program, or you can fill out at your leisure. And I think that will give you the link. So let's take a look here at the chat and see what we've got. We've got some people introducing themselves. Angie points out that headwaters are priceless. In fact, she lives along the Elk River, which is one of those waters that arises in the Mont Forest. Gail, welcome. It's a key place for clean, originating sources of downstream waters. Scott means clean, beautiful. Samantha, start of the main rivers. Pam was the one that lived along the Shavers Fork. Headwaters means life, biodiversity, clean water for so many. John mentions that it's really the birthplace of pristine waters, pristine rivers. Headwaters to Ellie means clean, safe water. Genzo lives in Morgantown, as do I. It's a great opportunity for natural resource protection and conservation. So I'll open it up to anybody else. And I see Mark's question, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But does anybody have any initial comments or reflections?
Mike, did you say you wanted to stop the recording at this point?
Yes, thank you for reminding me that.